I was startled awake at 3 a.m. by a harsh, grating sound of metal striking earth. Through the window, I froze when I saw my son, Ethan, and his wife, Olivia, secretly burying an old wooden chest in the cactus garden my late husband had loved so dearly. The next morning, I dug that chest up with my own 2 hands, and when I opened it, the world I thought I knew shattered into a million pieces. My name is Amelia Croft, and I'm a 72-year-old widow from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Now you sit right here and let me tell you the story of how an old mother reclaimed her stolen legacy and buried the lies of those she loved most in the very hole they had dug themselves. That night, I woke up at 3 in the morning. It wasn't old age keeping me up, but a strange sound. A dry, jarring clang of metal hitting dirt, breaking the sacred silence of the New Mexico desert. Our home, the one my late husband Samuel and I built with our own hands, had always been an oasis of peace. But tonight, something was terribly wrong. Confused, I slipped out of bed, my bare feet quiet on the wooden floors I'd known for 40 years. I didn't turn on a light. The cold, silver moonlight flooded through the large window, enough for me to see everything. I crept to my bedroom window, the one overlooking Samuel's beloved cactus garden. He used to say that every cactus had a resilient soul, just like a true artist. And then I saw them. My heart felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Under the pale moonlight, 2 figures were furiously digging a hole. That tall, lanky frame, I could never mistake it. It was Ethan, my only son. And the woman beside him, with her quick, calculating movements, was Olivia, my daughter-in-law. They looked like 2 coyotes trespassing on the most sacred ground, their movements urgent and anxious, as if they were committing an unforgivable crime. I stood there, hidden behind the linen curtain, completely numb. My breath caught in my chest. The 2 people I trusted most in this world, the son I had brought into this world, the woman he called his wife, were doing something shady behind my back, in my husband's memorial garden, in the dead of night. After they placed what looked like an old wooden chest into the hole, they hastily filled it in, clumsily erasing their tracks before tiptoeing back to the guest house like thieves in the night. I couldn't sleep a wink for the rest of that night. I sat in the darkness, staring at the patch of yard where the crime had taken place. And I knew, whatever was under that dirt, it was going to change everything. The next morning, I waited until their car had pulled away from the gravel driveway, the sound of the engine fading into nothing. The Santa Fe sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, but my heart was as dark as a storm cloud. I threw on a cardigan, pulled on my gardening boots, and grabbed Samuel's small shovel. My hand trembled, not from the cold, but from a vague, gnawing fear. I walked straight to the freshly disturbed earth. The soil was still loose, still dark. I started digging, 1 shovelful at a time. I had no idea what I was about to find. A weapon? Drugs? Some other terrible secret? When the shovel hit something hard with a dull thud of wood, my heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I fell to my knees, using my bare hands to claw away the last layer of dirt, and pulled up a worn wooden chest, the kind my husband Samuel used to store his drawing supplies. With trembling hands, I flicked open the rusty latch. The lid swung open, and my world caved in. The first thing that hit me wasn't something gruesome, but something far worse. It was dozens, maybe hundreds of sketches, studies of form and light, unfinished drawings on yellowed paper. I recognized them instantly. These were Samuel's most private works, the raw thoughts of a genius laid bare, the embryonic ideas he never wanted to make public. His creative soul, more precious than any finished painting, was being used as raw material for some scheme. I understood immediately. They were stealing these works to create forgeries, to hire someone to finish them, and sell them off as newly discovered masterpieces. It was an unimaginable desecration. But that wasn't the most horrifying part. At the bottom of the chest, after I lifted the fragile stacks of paper, was an ivory-colored envelope, carefully sealed with beeswax still intact. On it was Samuel's familiar, strong, slanted handwriting. My heart stopped for a beat. I shakily broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in 4. It was Samuel's original handwritten last will and testament, with the signatures of 2 witnesses I knew well, and the notary seal of a reputable law firm. I read it word for word, and the air was sucked from my lungs. It was completely different, a world away from the will Ethan had briefly shown me after Samuel's funeral 5 years ago. That counterfeit will I had believed hook, line, and sinker for all those years was cold and clinical. It stated that Ethan, as the sole son, would inherit the majority of his father's cash assets and investments. The ownership of all artwork would also go to Ethan, with a small provision that I, Amelia, had the right to live in the house until my death. With that immense fortune, Ethan and Olivia had been able to live so lavishly, burning through the inheritance on fancy cars, extravagant vacations, and foolish investments in Olivia's art gallery. And now that the money was gone, they had come back for the last gold mine, his father's artistic legacy. But this real will, the one in my hands, it wasn't just a legal document. Samuel had left his entire artistic legacy, including all finished and unfinished works, image rights, the studio, and everything related, to me, his wife. His reasoning was written right there, the words like a whisper meant only for me. Because Amelia is not just my wife. She is my eyes, the very soul in my brushstrokes. She was the one beside me in the studio at midnight, the one who saw my failures as well as my triumphs. Only she understands and has the right to decide this legacy's fate. Let her be the one to decide which paintings see the light of day and which will stay with us forever. All the broken pieces suddenly clicked together into a picture of betrayal so perfect it was terrifying. My son hadn't just deceived me. He had desecrated his own father's final wish. He had given me a fake will, stolen my rightful inheritance, and was now continuing his crimes by forging the very legacy he had stolen. This deception didn't start last night. It had been going on for 5 long years. 5 years I had spent grieving while he lived a lie, basking in luxury built on my pain. I calmly brought the chest inside, placing it on Samuel's old work table. I carefully photographed everything with my phone, every page of the real will, every sketch, close-ups of the notary seal and signatures. Then I drove into town to a copy shop and made multiple copies of all the documents. The originals and the chest I hid in a secret compartment under the studio floor that only Samuel and I knew about. I knew this was no longer a family matter that could be solved with lectures or tears. This was a crime. Forging a will, fraudulent appropriation of property, and now a conspiracy to commit art fraud for commercial trade. These were serious federal offenses. Ethan and Olivia had gone too far, and they were going to pay. I returned home and brewed a pot of strong Earl Grey, Samuel's favorite. I sat in his armchair, looking out at the cactus garden. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt Samuel there with me, and he was waiting for me to act. With a resolve that surprised even myself, I picked up the phone. My hand no longer shook. I made the 2 calls that would decide all of our fates. The first call was to Marion Shaw, an old family friend. She was a retired federal court judge, a woman with a mind as sharp as a razor who had no tolerance for injustice. I kept it brief. "Marion, it's Amelia. I need your help. It's about Samuel's will." The second call was to New York, to a man whose name was feared by art forgers all over the world, Dr. Alastair Finch, the top art authenticator in the country. "Dr. Finch," I said, my voice steady, "this is Amelia Croft, wife of the late painter Samuel Croft. I believe I have a case you'll find very interesting." When I hung up, I saw my reflection in the window pane. It wasn't the face of a gentle 72-year-old widow anymore. It was the face of a woman preparing for war, a war without mercy. Ethan and Olivia may have started this game, but I would be the one to finish it. 2 days later, I drove to a small, discreet coffee shop on the outskirts of Santa Fe. Marion Shaw was already there waiting. Her silver hair was cut in a neat bob, her eyes as sharp as ever behind her horn-rimmed glasses. She wasn't the type to pat your back and comfort you. She was the type to give you a strategy. "Tell me, Amelia, what's happened?" she said as soon as I sat down, skipping the pleasantries. I spread the copies out on the table, the fake will, the real one, the photos of the sketches. I told her the story, clearly and without a single sob, like a witness giving testimony. Marion listened, her eyes fixed on the papers, nodding decisively every so often. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, staring into her black coffee. Then she looked up, her gaze like steel. "They're not just stupid, Amelia, they're reckless. Forging a will and engaging in fraudulent interstate commerce is a federal crime. And art? Oh, the art," she shook her head. "The FBI has a whole team for this, the art crime team. They don't play around." "What do I do, Marion?" I asked. "Do I report them now?" "Not yet," she said, holding up a finger. "If you report them now, they'll deny everything. They'll say you're old, confused, bitter. They'll destroy the evidence. We don't just need proof of the crime that happened. We need to catch them in the act of committing a new one. We need to set a perfect trap, one they will happily walk right into." At the same time, in New York, Dr. Alastair Finch had received the package I'd sent overnight. He called me back immediately, his voice buzzing with a strange excitement, like a scientist about to discover a new species. "Mrs. Croft, this is an honor and a travesty. I've reviewed the images you sent. Samuel's sketching technique is unmistakable. Anyone who tries to complete these will leave a trail like an elephant in the snow. If they dare bring these to market, I can expose them with a single glance." "I have a plan, Doctor," I said, "and I'm going to need your expertise." "I'm at your service, madam," he replied without hesitation. "Protecting the legacy of great artists like your husband is my life's mission." The pieces were on the board. I had the law on my side with Marion and true art as my weapon with Dr. Finch. Now it was time for this old mother to direct her own play. A week later, I called Ethan. I had practiced in the mirror, making my voice tremble just enough, sound weary enough, like an old woman who was losing her grip. "Ethan, honey," I began, my voice frail. I haven't been feeling well lately. I keep thinking about your father." "What's wrong, Mom?" There was a hint of impatience in his voice, but he tried to sound concerned. "I think I'm getting too old for all this. I want to do one last thing for your father before I don't have the strength anymore. I want to organize a major exhibition, honey, one final tribute to honor him." I could hear Olivia whispering in the background. They were clearly together. A short pause. I could picture their calculating eyes meeting. "Oh, Mom, that's a wonderful idea," Ethan said, his voice suddenly enthusiastic. "But are you up for it?" "Not by myself," I answered, sounding pathetic. "I need your help. I want you two to take full control. Pick out the most brilliant pieces, the ones you think are most deserving. Even those works you might have newly found. Let's put them center stage for the whole world to see your father's masterpieces." I could almost hear the gears turning in their heads. This was it. The bait was cast. It was a golden opportunity to legitimize the forgeries, to unveil them to the public, the critics, and most importantly, the wealthy collectors, all at an event organized by the artist's own wife. Who would ever suspect a thing? Of course, Mom, Olivia jumped in, her voice sweet as honey. We'll handle everything. You just rest. We'll make Dad proud. Thank you, my dears, I whispered, fighting back a bitter smile. You are truly my devoted children. When I hung up, the frailty vanished. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the kind Samuel and I used to drink in the studio. I took a sip. The play had begun. On Marion's advice, I hired a private investigator, a quiet, middle-aged man who was incredibly efficient. His reports arrived in my inbox daily, complete with photos taken from a distance. They had rented a small art studio on the outskirts of town. The photos showed an unfamiliar man, a known copyist the PI had identified, working diligently at an easel. Olivia was constantly in and out, holding Samuel's sketches. Ethan was there too, but he mostly just paced, looking anxious, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just an incompetent puppet, pulled by the strings of greed and envy. A month later, they brought the results to my house. 6 large oil paintings set in ornate frames. They set them up in the living room, their faces beaming with pride. "Look, Mom," Olivia chirped. "We found these cleaning out the old storage unit. They're clearly Dad's final masterpieces that he never had a chance to finish. We had them professionally restored." I walked closer, putting on my reading glasses and pretending to study them intently. I had to admit, the forger was good. He'd imitated Samuel's style well, especially his signature use of desert colors. But to me, the woman who had lived with Samuel for 40 years, who had watched him paint thousands of times, these paintings were lifeless. They were empty shells, lacking the struggle, the inner light that only Samuel could create. "Oh, they're magnificent," I said, bringing a hand to my mouth to hide my contempt. I turned to them, letting my eyes well up with tears. "Your father would be so proud. I'm speechless." "We knew you'd love them," Ethan said, his face relaxing with relief. "We have to display them," I said with conviction. "They must have the most prominent spot in the exhibition, the centerpiece, for everyone to admire." Olivia and Ethan glanced at each other, an unmistakable, triumphant smirk passing between them. They had swallowed the bait, hook, line, and sinker. They had no idea that every compliment from my lips, every one of my fake tears, was another shovelful of dirt digging the grave they had prepared for themselves. That night, after they had gone, I stood alone in the living room, staring at the forgeries. They weren't just oil and canvas. They were living proof of insatiable human greed, and they would be the main attraction at the final exhibition, the one that would bring the whole truth to light. On the night of the exhibition, the air in the Garcia Lorca Gallery, Santa Fe's most prestigious art space, was thick with anticipation. Warm spotlights shone on the pristine white walls where Samuel Croft's masterpieces were hung with reverence. The art world's elite had all gathered, the toughest critics from New York, esteemed museum directors from Chicago, wealthy collectors from Texas, and of course, the press and television crews. I stood in a quiet corner, observing. I was wearing a silk dress the color of jade, the color of Samuel's eyes. My silver hair was swept up in an elegant bun, revealing the pearl earrings he'd given me on our 20th anniversary. I looked every bit the graceful widow, a living relic of a bygone era. No one could have guessed the storm raging inside my chest. The center of attention, of course, was Ethan and Olivia. They were basking in their manufactured glory. Ethan, in an expensive suit, was bragging to a collector about his childhood memories in Dad's studio. Olivia, dazzling in a scarlet dress, was gracefully explaining to a critic the emotional process of discovering and restoring the new pieces. They were the perfect picture of devoted children, the worthy heirs. And there, on the main wall, under the brightest spotlights, hung the 6 forgeries.
They looked so brazen, so out of place among Samuel's authentic works. They were like imposters trying to sneak their way into a royal bloodline. I scanned the crowd. Marion Shaw stood near the bar, quiet as an owl, her sharp eyes taking in everything. In another corner, Dr. Alastair Finch, his silver beard neatly trimmed, was chatting with the director of the Getty, but I knew he was waiting for my signal. And I saw them too, two men in plain clothes who looked a little out of place. They were drinking mineral water and speaking to no one. The FBI agents. Everything was in place. The stage was set. All that was left was to pull back the velvet curtain. At 9 o'clock sharp, the gallery manager stepped up to the podium and invited me to speak. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I took a deep breath and walked to the podium. I looked directly at Ethan and Olivia. They were smiling at me, the smug smile of winners. I began in a soft, nostalgic voice. I spoke of my love for Samuel, of how he saw the world, of how he turned pain into beauty. I spoke of our home, the studio, the smell of oil paint and turpentine that had become the scent of my life.
Samuel always said that every painting holds a truth, I said, my voice growing stronger. And tonight, we are here to honor his truth. I paused, turning towards the main wall. And tonight, we also get to witness another truth, one that has been newly unearthed. My son, Ethan, and my daughter-in-law, Olivia, have contributed these incredible discoveries. I applauded. The room applauded with me. Ethan and Olivia nodded, beaming. To help us understand the profound value of these works, I continued, I'd like to invite a friend to the stage, an expert whose name is known throughout the art world. Please welcome Dr. Alastair Finch. A murmur went through the crowd. The name Alastair Finch carried the weight of a verdict. Ethan and Olivia looked at each other, the smiles on their faces tightening just a bit. They must have thought I'd invited him to authenticate and inflate the value of the paintings. Dr. Finch walked to the podium, the very picture of erudition. He didn't look at the paintings. He looked directly at the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice clear and resonant. Art is truth, and as a guardian of that truth, it is my duty to speak it, no matter how unpleasant it may be. He gave a signal. A large screen descended from the ceiling. Please look here. On the screen was an infrared photograph of the first forgery, placed next to a similar image of a real Samuel Croft. As you can see, Finch explained, pointing with a laser, Samuel's underdrawing always has an intentional chaos, a search for the form. Here it is too clean, too timid. This is the hand of a copyist, not a creator. He went on, deconstructing each painting. Pigment analysis. This particular shade of titanium white wasn't invented until 2 years after Samuel Croft's death. Canvas analysis. Traces of synthetic fiber. Samuel used only pure linen. And finally, the brush strokes. Here, he said, zooming in on a detail, is a commendable attempt at mimicry, but it lacks his unmistakable fingerprint. It lacks the conviction, the anguish. It is a corpse without a soul. The room was dead silent. I could hear someone gasp. All eyes were now fixed on Ethan and Olivia, not with admiration, but with suspicion and disgust. Ethan's face was ashen. Olivia was trembling, her lips moving, but no words coming out. My conclusion, as an expert who has dedicated 30 years to the study of Samuel Croft, Finch finished with a flourish, is that these 6 paintings are, without a doubt, forgeries. They are a blatant and calculated insult to the legacy of one of America's greatest artists. A stunned silence fell over the room. The air was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Every gaze, which had shifted from curiosity to suspicion, now settled on Ethan and Olivia with pure revulsion. "No, that's a lie!"
Ethan screamed, his face flushing with anger and panic. He pointed a finger at Dr. Finch. "Who are you to say that? You're insulting my father's work. These are masterpieces we found, his legacy." Olivia, recovering more quickly, stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. Her voice trembled, but she tried to sound forceful. "Ladies and gentlemen, there is clearly a misunderstanding. Perhaps Dr. Finch is being overly cautious. We have papers of provenance." She gestured to an assistant, but no one moved. Dr. Finch just gave a cold smile. "Provenance papers, Mrs. Croft? You mean the ones you paid some amateur in Albuquerque to sign? Art doesn't lie, only people do." "That's enough," Ethan roared, turning on me. "This was your plan, wasn't it? Mother, you set this all up. You've gone senile. You can't stand that we're successful, that we're carrying on Dad's legacy." Everyone turned to look at me. I stood there, calm in the eye of the storm. I took the microphone, my quiet breath amplified in the deadly silence. "My son is right about one thing," I said, my voice no longer soft, but resonant and sharp as a blade. I was senile, so senile and blind that I trusted a snake I'd been raising in my own home for years. A shocked gasp went through the crowd. I ignored it. "You call this your father's legacy? You call these masterpieces?" I stared directly into Ethan's eyes, my gaze like ice. "Then explain this." I gave a signal. On the large screen, the images of the forgeries vanished. In their place, a short video began to play, shot from a hidden camera. It showed the shabby suburban studio, the forger's face clear as day as he worked, and Olivia standing right beside him, pointing, holding one of Samuel's original sketches in her hand. What the hell is this?" Olivia stammered, her face white as a sheet. "Is this the emotional restoration process you told everyone about, Olivia? Or is this the manufacturing of counterfeit goods?" The crowd erupted. I heard the gallery magnate Herschel Roth, who was set to buy 2 of the paintings, bark into his phone. "Kill the deal. Yes, I said kill it." Another collector, a wealthy woman from Dallas who had been standing next to Olivia, took a step back as if from a contagious disease. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "Disgusting." "And that isn't even the biggest surprise of the evening," I continued, my voice rising above the murmurs. I signaled the assistant again. The video disappeared, replaced by a high-resolution scan of the original will. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice no longer a mother's, but that of an executioner of justice. "This is the true last will and testament of my husband, Samuel Croft. It was stolen and hidden for 5 years, while a fraudulent document was used to seize his estate." I read Samuel's words aloud, clearly and deliberately, especially the part where he entrusted his entire artistic legacy and its care to me. Every word I spoke was another nail in the coffin of Ethan and Olivia's careers and reputations. "For 5 years," I said, stepping down from the podium and walking toward my son, who stood frozen. Now the tears came. Real ones, not of weakness, but of pure, condensed fury. "I have lived a lie. My rightful inheritance, your father's soul, the dignity of this family was stolen, sold out and trampled on by my own son, all for money." "Mom," Ethan choked out, his voice lost. But it was too late. All around them, the world they had built on lies was literally collapsing. Investors in Olivia's gallery were on their phones with their lawyers. Collectors were turning their backs and walking out. Art critics were furiously scribbling down every detail of the scandal of the century. They hadn't just lost a sale. They had lost everything. Their credibility, their connections, their future. In that moment, I no longer saw my son. I saw a pathetic stranger consumed by his own greed. Just then, the two men in plain clothes I'd noticed earlier stepped quietly out of the crowd. They walked directly to Ethan and Olivia, who stood like statues. One of the men held up a badge. "Ethan Croft, Olivia Croft," the man said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "We're special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You're under arrest for wire fraud, art forgery, and probate fraud." The murmurs turned into a stunned silence, broken only by the frantic clicking of camera shutters. Olivia's knees buckled, but an agent caught her. Ethan looked as though his soul had left his body. They were handcuffed. The cold click of metal in the warm gallery was the harshest sound I'd ever heard. They were led away in front of hundreds of eyes, in front of lenses capturing every moment of their humiliating downfall. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a public and permanent annihilation of their honor on the very stage they had chosen for their own coronation. When their shadows disappeared through the door, I remained at the podium. The room was still. People looked at me, not with pity, but with a kind of awe. "The exhibition is over," I said, "but my work is just beginning."
They faced years in prison. Olivia's gallery was sealed. The Croft name went from a symbol of art to a symbol of disgrace. But for me, revenge wasn't enough. True justice is about what you do with the legacy you've reclaimed. I didn't sell a single painting. Instead, I established the Samuel Croft Art Foundation. Our home, our studio, is now a residency and retreat, a fellowship exclusively for talented young women artists who have the passion but lack the opportunity. My husband's legacy isn't in the millions of dollars that Ethan and Olivia craved. It is living, breathing, and creating in the souls of the artists who follow. So, my friends, my sisters, that night, my son tried to bury the truth in the dark of my garden. But he didn't know one thing. Some legacies, much like the dignity of a 72-year-old woman, when you try to bury them, they only sink their roots deeper. And when they rise stronger and more brilliant than anything on this earth